Investing in these basic research help NSF, DOE, and NASA and other agencies to create scientific breakthroughs. And investments like SBIR and STTR are key to supporting jobs and retaining talent and leveraging state and private funding in America's heartland. I am proud to work with my colleagues to encourage innovation and to give our businesses the resources they need to thrive. We must take every opportunity to strengthen investment in R&D so we can continue breaking boundaries and moving forward in our economy. Thank you, Madam Chair, for hosting this event, and I yield back.
Great. If there are other members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements are going to be added to the record at this point. I now would like to introduce our phenomenal witnesses, and thank you so much again for being with us this morning and for slightly bearing with us as we conduct this hearing now on the Zoom platform. Our first witness is Dr. Stephen Binkley. Dr. Binkley is the Acting Director and Principal Deputy Director in the Office of Science at the U.S. Department of Energy. In this capacity, Dr. Binkley is the Senior Career Science Official in the Office of Science, which is the third largest sponsor of basic research in the United States of America. Prior to his experience in various leadership positions in the Department of Energy, Dr. Binkley has held senior positions at the Department of Energy's Sandia National Laboratories, a favorite of this committee, and the Department of Homeland Security. Our next witness is Dr. Ben Schrag. Dr. Schrag is an SBIR STTR Program Director and Policy Liaison at the National Science Foundation. He joined NSF as a Program Director in 2009, leading the Advanced Materials and Instrumentation portfolios. Prior to NSF, he was the Director of Research and Development at Micromagnetics and served as a visiting scientist at Brown University. Our third witness is Dr. Maryann Feldman. Dr. Feldman is the Distinguished Professor in the Department of Public Policy and Professor of Finance at the Kenan-Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina. We see that Congresswoman Ross is clapping vehemently, hailing from North Carolina herself. From 2014 to 2017, she held the joint appointment at the National Science Foundation as the Science of Science and Innovation Policy Program Director. Dr. Feldman co-chaired the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine's recent assessment of the SBIR STTR programs at DOE and the NIH. Our next witness is Mr. George Karavias. He is the Chief Executive Officer of GeoFabrica, Inc. in Michigan. Mr. Karavias is an experienced chief executive with an almost 40-year career in engineering and applied technology. He must have started as a child. He began his career developing computer-aided manufacturing, computer-aided design systems in the defense industry and successfully managed multi-year, multi-million-dollar projects for manufacturing and information technology applications. Prior to establishing his current business, GeoFabrica, Mr. Karavias founded and helped to lead 2 technology ventures, one which grew to over 200 million in sales. Our final witness is Dr. Nigel Rule, and I would like to recognize my colleague, Congressman Feenstra, to introduce Mr. Rule.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I am very pleased to welcome Dr. Nigel Rule, Associate Professor of Chemical and Biological Engineering at Iowa State University, to testify before our subcommittee today. In addition to being a professor, Dr. Rule is also a Jack R. and Carol A. Johnson Faculty Fellow and Director of Graduate Education and a College of Engineering Entrepreneurial Fellow. In his time at Iowa State, Dr. Rule has been involved in the National I-Corps program and also participated in 3 separate Iowa State I-Corps site cohorts. Additionally, Dr. Rule has contributed to several successful IBR, SBIR, and STTR award applications. One of these successful awards helped ensure the realization of startup called Schrag Laboratory, established in 2018 and initially incubated in Iowa State's Roy J. Carver Co-Lab on the north side of the campus. Additionally, Dr. Rule has been involved with SBIR awarded small businesses, a small business that was recently acquired, Frugi Biotechnology Incorporated. He maintains that the progress and ability to connect to this acquisition partner was made possible through SBIR funds. I want to thank Dr. Rule for taking the time out of his busy schedule to join us today, and we are looking forward to his testimony. I yield back the balance of my time.
Great. And as our witnesses should know, you're each going to have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. We can't wait to hear it. Your written testimony is included in the record for the hearing as well. And then when you've completed your spoken testimonies, we'll begin with questions, and each member is going to have 5 minutes to question the panel. We will start with Dr. Binkley.
Thank you, Chairwoman Stevens, Ranking Member Feenstra, and members of the subcommittee. I'm pleased to join you today to discuss the Department of Energy's programs for small business innovation research and small business technology transfer, and how legislation like the proposed Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer Improvements Act of 2021 can contribute to the department's innovation and technology transition goals. The SBIR STTR programs are an important federal contribution of our nation's innovation enterprise. They address a critical stage of technology development where innovations may stall because of a lack of access to funding, particularly for those where commercialization times can be long. SBIR STTR funding enables small businesses to prove feasibility and demonstrate successful working prototypes after undergoing scientific peer review. The programs help to catalyze relationships small businesses build with research institutions, larger businesses, and the investment community. DOE uses its SBIR STTR program to address innovation opportunities in its mission areas such as clean energy and scientific instrumentation to support discovery science. Within DOE, the Office of Science has managed the SBIR STTR program since they were first authorized in 1992. The programs work collaboratively with research and development program offices throughout the department to leverage their technical expertise and identify opportunities for small business innovation that are aligned with the DOE missions. ARPA-E independently manages its own SBIR STTR programs. In fiscal year 2021, DOE obligated $353 million for SBIR and STTR programs, issued 465 Phase 1 awards, 229 Phase 2 awards, and the awards were made to small businesses across 44 states and the District of Columbia. Over the last 10 years, Congress has made important changes to SBIR STTR programs that have allowed DOE to improve commercialization outcomes of its awardees, including the introduction of second Phase 2 awards authorized in 2012, and third Phase 2 awards enabled by the Commercialization Assistance Pilot Program authorized in 2019. In addition, the 2019 expansion of technical and business assistance provided more funds and greater flexibility in using these funds to support commercialization. Finally, the administrative funding pilot program has enabled DOE to offer energy I-Core training to its Phase 1 awardees. Past evaluation of the programs by the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine have found that DOE needs to do more to improve participation by underrepresented groups. Our first major initiative in this area was the introduction in 2014 of our Phase 0 application assistance program targeted at underrepresented groups, women-owned small businesses, socially and economically disadvantaged small businesses, and small businesses from underrepresented states. We have since expanded this program to include all first-time applicants, but 2/3 of the participants to this program continue to come from underrepresented groups. The programs have focused attention on underrepresented groups during the award selection process in fiscal year 2021 and implemented diversity promoting policy factors in fiscal year 2022, leading to consistent improvement in the percentage of awards going to underrepresented groups. In fiscal year 2021, Women-owned small businesses and socially and economically disadvantaged small businesses each made up more than 10% of our Phase 1 awardees, up from close to 5% in 2013. We recognize, with all that said, we recognize that we need to do much more to encourage women and socially and economically disadvantaged individuals to explore entrepreneurial STEM careers. From a broad policy perspective, we note that the strength of SBIR STTR programs has been the flexibility provided to agencies to adapt the programs to serve their respective missions. And we encourage Congress to continue to provide agencies with such flexibility. Chairwoman Stevens, Ranking Member Feenstra, and members of the subcommittee, thank you again for the opportunity to speak about DOE's SBIR STTR program and for your continued efforts to enhance the nation's ability to apply innovative discoveries in federal agency missions. I look forward to discussing the program further.
Excellent. With that, we're going to move to Dr. Schrag, please.
Chairwoman Stevens, Ranking Member Feenstra, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to testify on the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer programs at the National Science Foundation. My name is Ben Schrag, and I am a Program Director and Policy Liaison with NSF's SBIR STTR program. NSF has funded research and researchers, innovations and innovators, and infrastructure that have provided incredible benefits to the nation. The internet, Google, Qualcomm, 3D printing, the economic theory underpinning spectrum auctioning and kidney exchanges, and even the discovery of the enzymes at the heart of the polymerase chain reaction, the chemical reaction that enables COVID-19 tests, that have been critical in the fight against the pandemic. NSF investments have been foundational to all of these. NSF's mission is to support fundamental research across all fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and all levels of STEM education. Given this unique role in supporting innovators, the agency recognized early on the potential for greater and faster commercialization of NSF-funded research. That is why, in the late 1970s, NSF created the SBIR program. The program is an integral part of the NSF strategy to stimulate innovation and address societal needs through the commercialization of the results of fundamental research. Our strategy for the SBIR and STTR programs is to focus primarily on supporting early-stage startup companies, and especially firms new to government funding. We seek to support these firms long before private investors or customers are ready to provide financial support. This approach allows our funding to have maximum impact on each awardee, and also allows our funding to impact the community of innovators and entrepreneurs as broadly as possible. In recent years, the large majority of our Phase 1 awardees are firms with fewer than 10 employees and that were founded in the preceding 5 years. In fiscal year 2021, over 85% of our Phase 1 SBIR and STTR awards represented the first ever award received by the applicant small business from any federal agency. We have used multiple strategies to encourage new applicants to participate and to help maximize their chances of success. For example, our project pitch is a short pre-application review covering key aspects of a potential project, giving every new applicant an accessible and fast way to get feedback on whether their proposed project is a good fit for the program. We have also changed the administrative and compliance checking processes for Phase 1 proposals to allow proposers to fix most administrative mistakes in their proposals. This has lowered the percentage of Phase 1 proposals that are not considered from about 15%, which was typical a decade ago, to about 2 to 3% in recent years. NSF has also designed several supplemental funding opportunities to spur the commercial success of its SBIR companies. The flagship amongst these is the Phase 2B supplement, which provides up to an additional $500,000 on top of the $1 million Phase 2 award for a firm generating marketplace traction for the first time. In addition to providing funding, NSF uses experiential education to help researchers gain valuable insight into starting a business or industry requirements and challenges. For example, just under 2,100 NSF SBIR and STTR Phase 1 awardee companies have participated in a condensed version of NSF's Innovation Core program called the Beat the Odds Bootcamp. Although our focus is on the earliest and riskiest projects, our portfolio of awardees has had strong commercialization success in recent years. Over the past 6 years, we have seen about 200 confirmed exits, where our awardee organization has had an initial public offering or undergoes a successful merger or acquisition, and about $14 billion in follow-on private funding. For over 40 years, NSF has helped startups and small businesses across the country transform their ideas into marketable products and services through our SBIR and STTR programs. NSF is always assessing its performance against the broad goals of the SBIR and STTR programs, and this process has led to new supplements, new outreach, and enhancements to other NSF programs. NSF is focused on helping these startups address all the potential risks, whether technical, market, team, or financial, that they may face in their commercial journey. On behalf of the National Science Foundation, the SBIR, STTR programs, and our awardees, I want to thank you for your support of NSF and for this opportunity to highlight programs that provide startups and small businesses with the means to keep America on the forefront of technological innovation. I would be pleased to answer your questions.
Great. With that, we're going to hear from Dr. Feldman. We got to unmute you. There we go.
Great, very good. Well, thank you for inviting me to address the committee today. I'm honored to have this opportunity to talk about my research. I realize I've spent my career studying innovation, and the SBIR, STTR programs have been very important to the American system of innovation. It has been my pleasure to serve as the co-chair for the National Academy's assessment of the programs, and we've organized a dream team of scholars to look at this program. And overall, we find that the programs are effective public-private partnerships, and they play an important role in the commercialization of science and in sparking the American innovation economy. The programs have been successful on a variety of different measures, and they deserve your continued support. Now, these programs are so important to local innovative ecosystems that virtually every state has initiated programs to help win SBIR awards, and half of US states provide matching funds that top off the SBIR award. But this program does much more than simply provide money. They also provide the context for developing cutting-edge technology, for connecting small firms to one another, connecting them to universities and to federal agencies and labs. In each of our reports, we found that the programs are effective in stimulating small business research and experimentation and innovation. For DOE, our committee found that SBIR contributes to the agency's R&D needs and advances the national energy system. But importantly, we found that these awards have significant technological spillovers. And that means that firms that are located in the same state actually benefit greatly when an award is given to one firm. So these are very extensive benefits. For NIH, we found that the program really is conducting such rigorous and commercially relevant research that contributes to US leadership in the life sciences. And so in fact, from 1996 to 2020, 12% of new drug approvals and 18% of orphan drug approvals were associated with SBIR, STTR awardees. But each of our reports recommends ways the programs might be improved to improve commercialization. And I want to highlight some of these. For NIH, there is a need to reduce the timeframes used for reviewing and selecting awardees, while emphasizing more on the commercial potential. And here's where Congress could act to remove the requirement that applicants are subject to the same identical scientific review as the more basic projects. We also would encourage DOE to allow their technical and business assistants, that is the TABA funding, to be used to hire in-house experts. What we found is that DOE firms are staffed with managers with technological expertise, but they lack management expertise that allow them to pursue and grow their companies strategically. As far as participation by women and socially economic disadvantaged people, what we find is that the programs could be improved. And this is specifically greater outreach to minority serving institutions. DOE has a pipeline problem as there are fewer women and minorities in technical fields. For NIH, there are a large number of women and minorities, but their participation has not removed over time. And for both programs, you could work with the HBCUs. They're untapped resources. Collaborations between HBCUs and small businesses are rare, and their faculty are not selected as reviewers. Now, there's also the time lags associated with getting an award and more adversely affect women and minorities because they're less likely to get money from the private sector. I want to address this question of mills. And so while we have many proposals to limit the amount of awards, let me just say that complex innovation requires multiple and reinforcing awards. And I've done research with my students looking at this multiple award recipient problem. And the firms are very actively engaged in patenting. I would caution you in trying to ferret out waste, fraud, and abuse that we don't want to adversely affect incentives and distort the overall functioning of the innovation system. You know, periodic evaluations that we do are great and they can improve the operations of the program. But here's where we could use your help to ensure that the appropriate data are collected and available. For example, there are these rigorous evaluations of the proposals, but this information is not available to our congressionally mandated studies. I've been trying to talk more like a New Yorker and less like a Southerner, but let me just conclude by saying over the past 40 years, these programs have played a critical role in advancing the US innovative ecosystem, and they have really helped small businesses contribute to US competitiveness. Thank you for this opportunity.
Nice. That's great. Thank you. And with that, we'll hear from Mr. Caravias. We got to unmute you. There we go.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Thank you, Chairwoman Stevens, Ranking Member Feenstra, and members of the Subcommittee on Research and Technology. It is an honor and a privilege to join you today to testify on the SBIR and STTR programs. My name is George Caravias. I am the Chief Executive Officer of GeoFabrica, Inc., a small technology business based in Michigan that develops and builds manufacturing systems. Before I begin, allow me to tell you how highly I regard the SBIR and STTR programs. They are gems among government programs for small businesses. I appreciate all you do to make them possible. So on behalf of GeoFabrica and the many other SBIR, STTR awardees, I thank you. GeoFabrica is known for its work in additive manufacturing, otherwise known as 3D printing. We're currently pursuing two major efforts. One is the development of expeditionary manufacturing systems, transportable 3D printers that can operate at forward operating bases, at disaster sites, and on ships and trucks. We're also pioneering large-scale additive manufacturing. That involves making 3D printers to build parts that are as large or larger than the chairs and desks that you are sitting at today. We've performed many phase 1 and phase 2 SBIRs and are in the midst of completing a phase 3 SBIR funded by one of the suppliers to the DoD. Following is an abbreviated list of my recommendations for these programs. First, I suggest creating incentives to buy and use the prototypes resulting from the R&D. I suggest that SBIR, STTR programs create incentives for federal agencies, DoD program offices, and large corporations to buy and use the beta prototypes resulting from phase 2 efforts. Built-in beta users would go a long way to helping firms overcome the valley of death at the end of an SBIR or STTR. 2, accelerate the pace of SBIR, STTR project development. These projects take 4 to 6 years from conception to commercialization. 6 years is an eternity in terms of technology life cycles. 6 years is too long to wait for a solution. In 6 years, too many market opportunities have vanished. 3, opportunities should be expanded for open topic calls. The Air Force and the NSF have increasingly solicited very open or very broad topic calls. I believe this is a good trend that should be encouraged across all agencies. 4, expand access to companies owned by women and socially or economically disadvantaged persons. I applaud the efforts of this committee to foster SBIR, STTR participation by women and socially or economically disadvantaged persons. And 5th, I encourage the innovation in manufacturing. I strongly support the Act's language encouraging manufacturing innovation and prioritization of manufacturing in the United States. Support for manufacturing innovation should be expanded across all agencies. Federal funding should give high priorities to companies demonstrating a commitment to building products in the United States. Small businesses are at the heart of our economy and are vital participants in our rich culture of innovation. Small companies are nimble, innovative, and willing to make bold moves to commercialize new technologies. The SBIR, STTR programs are one of the better ways of supporting small business technologists across a range of geography, demographics, and experience levels. I thank you again for your work and for your continued support of the SBIR and STTR programs. I will be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Excellent. With that, we'll hear from Dr. Rule.
Great. I appreciate this opportunity to speak to you today. I wear an interesting dual hat here in this role of both as an academic member at Iowa State University, where my graduate students and I develop the initial seeds of these technologies and then seek for support of SBIR funds to take them out of the lab. To date, I've helped over the last 3 years, 3 separate entities start, and each of their starts, initial funding was SBIR funds. And in some cases, they've moved very quickly. One just last month to acquisition, and all of that is done with these funds. So I want to take my oral testimony just to highlight some of the things that I've detailed further in my written testimony. And it's mainly riffing off of this analogy of a seed. So coming from Iowa, it's a apt image of things that grow, and building things in my academic laboratory. It is a young, tender seed that needs a lot of support in order to make it survive the drought and winds that occur when it leaves the controlled environment of a lab. And there are 3 specific aspects of the SBIR program that I want to highlight, and namely, and these have already been highlighted today, but I'll further reinforce. So first, unique purposeful training. Dr. Schrag mentioned aspects of that at NSF. Second is funding to test feasibility, which is unique. Private funds are very scared of touching that, and so SBIR provides a critical role in supporting that. And then third is this validation to external stakeholders. So first, with purposeful training, it's already been mentioned that some programs think about this very intently. So we've had the privilege of working through the National Science Foundation in multiple boot camps where the team are trained in customer discovery. And in some cases, for example, Frugi Biotechnology Inc., they started with an idea in mind of their technology, of what market need it would fill. And when they went out and did customer discovery, they found actually that need wasn't as apparent, but there was another burning need. And so they pivoted due to this training that the National Science Foundation had them go through the SBIR program. And that pivot turned them to drug discovery customers. And that eventually was the company out in San Francisco that acquired Frugi. And so that was all done through customer discovery. In addition to that, they get training on their commercialization plan that's very data-driven. They have consultants that meet weekly to provide insight, training on IP, all those aspects that give resilience to this young, tender seed to grow. And so then Going to the next one, the funding to test feasibility. That again is something that I've seen with my companies. I out of graduate school had my very first startup attempt. Went to a premier business incubator out in Boston, and quickly found that my needs as a science-minded entrepreneur were very different. I needed more than a desk and a phone. I needed more than just a mock-up, a cardboard model. I needed to test feasibility. And that takes sufficient funding and required capital in order to do that. And so with SBIR funds for my 3 companies that are growing and employing 11 individuals today, all of that funding goes to that testing of feasibility. And that allows them to get that critical data to then stand before a private investor and provide a convincing pitch of what they can do. So that's very important. And last is this validation to external stakeholders. So it's a stamp of approval that you've gone through a scientific review. You're found meritorious, and it allows you to, again, strengthen that recommendation to seek fundraising. So last, I too just want to echo my gratitude to members of the subcommittee and for not only the longstanding support of SBIR, but also communicating it to your constituents that it's very important to have this innovation ecosystem. Also, wearing my academic hat, want to thank for fundamental tests, fundamental funding, which incubates those seeds. And I think we need to strive as we grow this pot and continue to expand to keep that parity of providing fundamental research to keep the pipeline of seeds alive, to then incubate into businesses, to expand diversity in order to have better regional representation as well as amongst people. And so anyway, with that, I look forward to questions.
Okay, that's great. We're now going to move to 5 minutes of questions. And the chair's going to recognize herself for 5 minutes. Dr. Schrag, you were in your testimony, you're talking about accessibility. And I'm just wondering, could you shed some light on how people find out about SBIR, STTR opportunities?
Thank you for that question, Chairwoman. Yes, at the NSF portfolio, we found that there's a number of different routes. We obviously, the NSF has a very high name brand among scientists and engineers, and a lot of times those folks are involved in inventing the technology, and so they may know about our programs. But more recently, we've tried to really create new routes to visibility for our program, and that includes a pretty coordinated digital marketing campaign, especially to underrepresented entrepreneurs and innovators, and a lot of outreach events. Our program directors are full-time dedicated to this program, and they attend and present at well over 100 outreach events per year, especially to, again, target communities where maybe our visibility is not as high. So we've tried to really create multiple different ways that people can find out about us. The other thing I would say is that our portfolio companies are great ambassadors. And so if we give them a good experience, if they find that they're supported and the NSF is adding value to their company, they are the best referrals that we can get, because they can talk to entrepreneurs in their network and get the word out that way.
Yeah, those ecosystems are really important. And we have Tech Town in Detroit, for instance, and that's sort of an accelerator, because what happens, we got a lot of university people here, and those are great hotbeds, but then people leave the university and they're years into their career and they're tinkering around in the garage or the basement, and then they forget all about these opportunities like SBIR, STTR. And this is why, frankly, as members of Congress, we share these opportunities. We look to unearth this. And Dr. Feldman, I want to get at your testimony was just fantastic. And you're talking about this linkage about what's going on at the HBCUs and SBIRs. And obviously there's some challenges to non-traditional and underrepresented firms, which we've talked about. But could you just shed a little bit more light on exactly what you shared in your testimony about why HBCUs tend to not be as plugged into technology transfer or SBIR, STTR opportunities?
So, I want to say that it is just an artifact of the data. And so, we don't know, are they applying and then not getting the funding, right? We are just observing who received the funding. And so our committee recommendation, we see all the HBCUs have engineering schools. Many of them have medical schools. And their faculty, graduate students also, because many times we see that academic companies are started by postdocs or PhD students. And so an important way that people learn about the program and also what makes a high quality proposal is in participating in a review panel.
Yeah.
And so that is something that we need to do. We need to do scientific review anyway. And by sort of broadening the list of participants, more people would know about the program and would know what a good proposal looks like. And I also love the idea of involving more small businesses in the evaluation of these proposals. Now, specifically at NIH, it's an issue because NIH, SBIR, STTR goes through the same evaluation as an R01 award. And so that is, evaluated on its scientific merit.
Yeah, and we have a lot, there's a lot with the evaluation component. And, I'm just wondering, Dr. Schrag, have you spent time going to these HBCUs with the NSF yet? I mean, you personally or anyone in your shop? Because I'm wondering if maybe we should do something like that. I mean, I know it's been 2 years of a pandemic, but have you spent time over there?
So we've actually approached those communities in multiple ways. The main focus of our outreach has actually been through organizations that support critical masses of underrepresented innovators and entrepreneurs, like the National Society for Black Engineers and SACNAS. There's a number of organizations. And so we find that those have a little bit of a greater scale nationally where we can get kind of in front of more folks at one time. But I think it's absolutely a great thing to explore. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I was over at Groves High School sending off a group of 125 students. It was a Black empowerment education tour to about a half a dozen HBCUs. And, I'm just thinking about how, we go and visit the national labs as members of Congress, and our chairwoman, Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson, has been involved with this MSI STEM Achievement Act, which passed the House as part of Competes, and I think that would further assist too. We're going to move to the next questioner, but I do want to put a pin in Dr. Feldman's great points on data collection and how we manage that. That's come up with our AmeriCorps program as well, and if we do a second round, maybe we can get into that. But with that, why don't I yield back and get to Mr. Feenstra for 5 minutes of questions.
Well, thank you so much, Madam Chair. And I want to thank everyone for their testimony. As I mentioned in my opening statement, one of the great aspects of SBIR and STTR programs are the ability to spark innovation in Middle America, not just on the coast. Dr. Rule, your story provides a great model for entrepreneurs. Can you further expand upon the advantage of building a startup in a state like Iowa? And then also, how has Iowa State supported and helped to foster this entrepreneurial spirit on campus in Ames and across the state?
Thanks, Representative Feenstra. Happy to. So yeah, my first startup experience was in a much more expensive climate on one of the coasts where funding did not go as far. And one of the benefits I've found in Iowa, especially with the entrepreneurship ecosystem that's being built here at Iowa State University, there are many incubators that are not only available and provide functional space, but they come at a cost point that is very affordable in terms of usage of SBIR funds. So we can use those funds to lease space to get the personnel that we need. And being close to a university is also gives us great access to talent and people. And a shout out to the Midwest. It's nice in the fact that people love it here and they want to stay here. So in terms of employee retainment, that's been a nice thing as well. They don't drift off and go to different companies.
Oh, that's great to hear. I mean, I'm just so impressed with what you do. I got a further question for you, Dr. Rule. As Congress is considering reauthorization of the SBIR and the STTR programs, the I-Corps program model is one that we have been looking at closely as a method to encourage SBIR success. What has been your experience with the I-Corps program, and do you think it's worthwhile for all SBIR and STTR applicants to be involved in this program? And would you consider any improvements that would be beneficial?
Thank you again for that question. Yeah, definitely. It provides critical feedback when you need it at the very beginning of your journey. So often the founding team is very much in love with their technology and they think they know what its prime application can be. However, this forced training, this experiential training makes you put it aside for a bit and go out and talk to others and not talk about your technology, but talk about their needs. And then that allows you to really match where those funds are going to go. So now you're not burning them towards a destination that doesn't make sense, but you're using them to really bring your product to a market that has a need that could be met.
Yeah. Thank you. I greatly appreciate those thoughts and ideas. Dr. Binkley, I'm very proud to have Ames National Lab located in my district. And I want to ask you about the important facet of DOE's SBIR program, partnerships with national labs. Can you discuss how the SBIR partnership with a national lab generally works? And then how does DOE utilize these partnerships to further capitalize on R&D in its mission areas?
Thank you, Representative Feenstra, for those questions. Those very, very good questions. We use a significant fraction of our SBIR funds in a mode that helps us advance instrumentation and experimental capabilities that can directly be folded back into our science programs. And Ames Lab is an example of one of the places where we do this. And we find that approach to advancing instrumentation and other features related to the scientific mission of the department is really important. I'll stop there.
Well, I appreciate those comments and what you do. I mean, I think of all the witnesses that we have. I mean, we're making great strides in these different areas, and I appreciate all your comments and thoughts. And with that, Chairman Stevens, I yield back.
Hey, that's great. And we'll turn to Dr. Bill Foster for 5 minutes of questioning now. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Stevens, Ranking Member Feenstra, and all the witnesses for joining us here today. I'd like to actually give you a little more chance to brag about some of the successes of the SBIR programs. Specifically, there's a company called Clear Flame Engine Technologies that's based out of Geneva, Illinois, just outside my district, which has finally succeeded in developing diesel engines which work with full thermodynamic efficiency on everything from corn ethanol to methanol from hydrogen hubs. And it's actually led by former researchers from Argonne National Lab and Stanford, and Clear Flame received funding from the SBIR it was growing and other sources, including everything from the corn growers in nearby states to a significant assistance from the National Lab and the SBIR programs. In fact, they just were able to raise $17 million from a combination of John Deere and I think Breakthrough Energy Ventures. So they've clearly vaulted across the valley of death. And so, Dr. Binkley, how does the Office of Science mass produce successes like Clear Flame and advance translational breakthroughs in other areas?
Thank you, Representative Foster. That's a very, very good question. Thank you for the opportunity for me to answer that. So the way we arrive at SBIR topics in the department is we have a network of federal program managers spanning the Office of Science and the applied energy programs and even parts of NNSA. And they are always on the lookout for topics that can advance the clean energy and national security missions of the department. And it's through that network of federal program managers that we identify topics that are folded into our funding opportunity announcements for phase 1 and phase 2 SBIR and STTR activities. And it's through that process that we are able to get proposals in across a very, very diverse set of activities. And it's essentially, go for the broad community input through the FOA process. And there are a number of outstanding successes over time.
And so and what I was struck with when I'm reading through the history of Clear Flame is how it started as a bright idea at a university. The technology was essentially proven at a small scale at Argonne National Lab. And then it's now to the point where I think they had a semi-truck driving around the National Mall powered by corn ethanol. And I didn't mention it, actually, one of the neatest things about it is that the pollutants coming out the back end of the diesel engine that they've developed are much, much smaller. So you don't have to worry about certain of the other things that actually cost a lot of money to try to mitigate in standard diesel engines. And so, but the pipeline from the bright ideas collected from both laboratory researchers and universities, then having some technical assistance, trying to sort of get to the proof of principle stage, and then launching to the point where venture capital will grab it, or established companies like John Deere. How is that pipeline set up, and what are the opportunities to just have the Department of Energy do more of this? Is it? Yeah.
Well, so the success at Argonne, I think, at least in my opinion, derived from the fact that there's close cooperation between the basic and applied programs at Argonne. So fundamental advances coming out of the chemistry and materials areas, and then close coupling of those activities with the funded activities at the lab funded by the applied energy offices. And I think that's a key strength in developing ideas that can be commercialized the way you described.
Okay. In my sort of last 30 seconds here, I'd like to point out it's a real concern with me. When I look at in the Office of Science, you have many ongoing construction projects at any time. And essentially all of the construction projects have just been clobbered by a combination of COVID and supply chain difficulties and the very rapid rate of wage inflation for technical personnel. And so they've ended up not making their initial budget estimates. As a result, in order to hold to the original budgets, they've cut scope, important scientific scope from these projects. And I'd like you to consider, if you would, and get back to us with a rough estimate of what would be involved in restoring the original scientific scope that was planned and appropriate levels of project contingency, really to correct for what is, we all hope, a one-time big body punch to all these ongoing projects. Because that's the sort of thing I think that putting in the startup funding for the competes and other appropriations things, I think would do a lot of good to making sure we get the scientific output that was planned on these very important construction projects. So if you could get back to us with some information on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, Representative Foster, we'd be very happy to get back to you with that information. We've tracked that very closely over the lifetime of the pandemic and have a really solid financial understanding of what the impacts are and the scope impacts to the projects.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and I yield back.
Great. And now we're going to move to Dr. Baird for 5 minutes of questioning. Thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I really appreciate you holding this session about SBIR and STTR. And I always enjoy the kind of information we get from these sessions. It really is beneficial to us making decisions on these committees. But I was also very pleased to have you join as we introduced HR 4033 you know, the SBIR and the STT Information Transfer Improvements Act during this Congress. So I want to thank you for that. And you know, America's leadership in science and technology is critical to our economic and national security. Basic research supported with taxpayer dollars through the National Science Foundation, NASA, NIH, and DoD, and even other federal agencies has led to key scientific discoveries that are very crucial in today's world, such as the internet, wireless communication, life-saving medicine, lasers, and many more. So this basic research produces the scientific fuel for innovation. Risk-taking small businesses are the engines for converting this kind of knowledge into new products and services. So small businesses are the catalyst for economic growth and producing good paying jobs in our communities. And with that, I want to move to Dr. Schrag. And in your testimony, you mentioned the HR 4033. So while the administration has not really taken a position on the bill, can you expand on your comments and explain how the bill would be most directly effective for the NSF?
Thank you,
Dr. Schrag.
Representative. Yes, thank you, Representative, for that question. Yeah, so I don't know if there's a specific aspect of the legislation. I don't want to run you out of time, but there's a number of different sections. Is there a particular area you'd like me to comment?
Yes.
We appreciate it. I think I would refer you to my written testimony. Obviously, some of the things that stand out to us are any ability for Congress to help create a little more stability around the program as a whole, and also around some of the pilot programs, which NSF uses many of to great effect, I believe. So that's all I think extremely positive. Beyond that, I'd be happy to answer any specific questions around any sections of the bill that are of interest.
Do any of the other witnesses care to address that issue? How effective this transfer for SBIR and STT are? If not, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And with that, we'll move to Congresswoman Ross for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Stevens and Ranking Member Feenstra, for holding this very important hearing. I also want to thank them for their efforts to improve SBIR and the STTR through their legislation introduced last year. These programs play an important role, as we've heard, in helping small companies take the initial steps to advance research and development and begin commercialization of exciting new discoveries. As this committee reflects on the program's 40 years, we should use the testimonies given today to inform how we can make improvements to ensure that we're optimizing success of federal dollars in the small business innovation space. And Dr. Feldman, it is a pleasure to have you here from the University of North Carolina. For many years, the National Academies surveyed SBIR award winners in an effort to track program outcomes, but it was always a challenging task. And now your committee is taking a different approach to measuring program outcomes. Can you talk about both the challenges of surveys and how you're now trying to measure SBIR program outcomes? What are the relative advantages and disadvantages of the different approaches?
Oh, Representative Ross, thank you so much for this question. So I can just talk about this all day. And really, with a survey, we worry about response bias. That is, who is filling out the survey and giving us information. And prior studies were only asking, sending their questionnaire to people who received the funding. What we've been able to do is to match from different data sources. So using patent data, looking at new product announcements, looking at follow-on funding, trying to track employment and really triangulating across different data sources so that we get a full picture of what's going on in the company. And so what we find is that the programs have significant impact. For NIH, we were able to look at new drug approval, new device approvals. And so, that is using a publicly validated source to provide evidence about the program. Let me mention one of the most exciting things that we're doing, and currently we are working on an evaluation for the National Science Foundation that is in progress. But we realize that firms get the award, but it is individual researchers who are doing the work, who have the ideas. And so we have also started looking at the individual researchers so that the firm is a way of sort of providing resources for individual PIs who actually are the inventors and have the creative ideas to move forward. And so what are the sort of limitations? Well, while I would like to know everything about a firm through its entire life cycle, what we see is firms change their names. And so, sometimes it's hard to track firms in a consistent basis. The question of, are they merged or acquired? Well, if they have an IPO, which is the gold standard, there's a lot of news about that. Mergers and acquisitions, less so, and especially when they are publicly held companies. And so, our data are as good only as all the underlying data. Let me mention for NIH, we did have the applicants who were not awarded. And so that allowed us to, again, have a fuller picture. But, it would be great if we could trace intellectual property, because even when firms do go bankrupt, those principal investigators who got the SBIR funding move on to other companies, taking their ideas and their experience with them. Wish we could do better on that front. But I do believe that we have done what is a state-of-the-art assessment of the programs.
Wonderful. I know I only have a few seconds left, but I wanted Dr. Binkley to maybe briefly comment on the importance of matching programs. We have one in North Carolina in aiding with diversity of applicants.
Thank you, Representative Ross. That's a great question. We've been working very, very hard across our entire research portfolio on diversity issues, and not just of the SBIR, STTR area. And so, it's important to have good outreach to minority serving institutions, HBCUs, and so on. And then the other tool that we've been using very aggressively over the last year is if you look at the Code of Federal Regulations that govern how we do processing of grant applications, we are allowed by the CFR to have program policy factors that allow us to focus more attention on, for example, minority serving institutions, HBCUs, EPSCoR states, et cetera. And so we've been using those tools in our funding opportunity announcement process overall. And, we'll see how this works over the next couple of years.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the chair for your indulgence. I yield back.
The women from North Carolina unite. And with that, we will pass it over to Congressman Meyer for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairwoman Stevens. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. And thank you to all our, to Ranking Member Feenstra and to all of our panelists who are here today. I think you are hearing broad and bipartisan enthusiasm and excitement for what the SBIR and STTR programs have been able to do. I want to just, we discussed a little bit on the underrepresented communities, and I wanted to shift that a little bit to ask to Dr. Schrag and Dr. Binkley, specifically around the veterans community. How have the SBIR and STTR programs engaged the veterans community, and what obstacles have you encountered if any, and working to fulfill the mission to foster and encourage participation from this population.
I guess I can start, Dr. Binkley. That's okay. Thanks for the question, Representative Meyer. Appreciate that. This is a very important issue and a focus of ours. One thing I would say is that NSF does have a specific request for supplemental funding, so an opportunity for our phase 2 awardees to actually request additional funding specifically to bring in and pay a veteran participant in their phase 2 research. And that gives the opportunity for that veteran to get kind of a boots on the ground experience in a deep technology startup research project. So that's called the Veterans Research Supplement, VRS, and it's something that we've continued to offer. I think has also been expanded throughout other parts of NSF subsequently. So that's been a great opportunity. The broader question about outreach to veterans does I think parallel some of the other really important issues we talked about with respect to underrepresented communities and geographies with less activity. And so I think our approach really has been to really double down on doing outreach, to have our digital marketing campaign tailored to try to target these communities, including veterans. And then the other thing is that, again, we've tried to really just create a program that is more approachable. And this is something that we hope helps everybody, but specifically people who don't have as much experience with grant proposals and government funding. And part of that is the project pitch process that I mentioned, which allows folks to get immediate feedback and immediate dialogue with our program directors. Having a compliance that's flexible and forgiving so folks don't feel like the door is slammed in their face for bureaucratic issues. And having our program directors who are, all of us program directors at NSF are both technical experts in our fields and also have startup experience as startup founders or investors. And so those folks, I think we have a little more ability to have empathy and understand where these folks are coming from and to kind of meet them where they live. So that's the kind of broader approach that we've taken to outreach to that community.
Okay, so Representative Meyer, thank you for that question. I have to confess that in the Department of Energy, we're not as far along as the National Science Foundation is in reaching veterans through our SBIR, STTR programs. We do have significant activities at a number of our national labs. And I think there are lessons that we can learn from NSF on how to do this in the SBIR, STTR area.
Dr. Binkley, I appreciate your candor there. And Dr. Schrag, thank you for that response. I think, before I came to Congress, I was the chairman of the Board of Student Veterans of America. And so for the post 9/11 GI Bill and what that has done for veterans in higher education, that cohort is by and large, what we saw in the immediate post 9/11 era. That cohort is now, shifting from concentration on undergrad to a concentration in graduate programs. And so I think we're at a very opportune time to be targeting efforts. And so I appreciate that outreach is being very concentrated and that there's work to make the program more approachable. But I think the time is right for this to be an expanded area of focus. And Dr. Schrag, real quickly, I know in the GAO report, it mentioned the flexibility to issue SBIR awards to companies that were venture capital or hedge fund or private equity funded, and that there had been some not as rapid adoption, or that some of the agencies had not used their full authority. Could you speak to that at all, and anything we can do to encourage SBIR awards to be going to appropriate companies and not having any discrepancies in terms of their funding source?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Representative Meyer. Yeah, so you're correct that the authority to issue SBIR awards to majority venture-backed companies is something NSF has not requested. As I mentioned, our focus is really on very early, very small companies. Typically speaking, companies will not become venture-backed until 2 or 3 rounds of private funding. And so those companies would tend to be later than the types of companies we look for. And in general, again, our approach is to try to provide funding where there's the biggest gap in the valley of death, right, in the private sector. And typically a company that's already half owned by venture capitalists would already have access to the private sector. And so we're less likely to fund those. I will say, though, that venture capital is a very common graduation of our companies. When they move out of the program to the next source of funding, venture capital is almost always part of that path. It just happens to be that we go first, and then venture capital tends to come a little later.
Thank you, Dr. Schrag. I appreciate that color. And Madam Chair, my time's expired, so I yield back.
Great. And with that, we're going to hear from Congresswoman Wild for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm proud that this committee has paid so much attention to the innovation challenges and opportunities for our country and economy in this Congress, approving a number of bills on a bipartisan basis, including my legislation, the Bipartisan Regional Innovation Act, which passed the House as part of the America Competes Act, which would invest in regional innovation strategy development and implementation for communities across the country. I think there's just as much potential in my district, the Greater Lehigh Valley, as there is in the Silicon Valley, and the entrepreneurs and innovators there need a fair shot at that. And I'm pleased to say that the Small Business Innovation Research Program, or SBIR, is already supporting some of this work by local innovators in my district, Pennsylvania's 7th. My community has a very proud tradition of manufacturing. It helped build the infrastructure and economic engine of America through the 20th century. And today's entrepreneurs are continuing that legacy by developing the next generation of technologies and by making them here in America. For example, last year, one constituent small business, Amorphic Tech, in Allentown, Pennsylvania, received a Phase 2 SBIR award from the Department of Energy to build on research and pursue solutions for a device that will reduce energy use up to 40% from personal desalinators to municipal water treatment plants. And another business in my district, Vaxform in Nazareth, Pennsylvania, received a Phase 1 SBIR award from the Department of HHS to pursue a vaccine against Group A strep. These types of investments and visionary innovators will help lead my community and our entire country into a 21st century economy, ready to tackle issues like global climate change, economic opportunity, and American manufacturing leadership. But a common refrain from aspiring SBIR awardees and entrepreneurs is that the process can be so complicated that it requires its own expertise to master. So Dr. Schrag and Dr. Binkley, how have the Department of Energy and NSF taken the challenge of improving first-time applicant success? And either one of you can start.
Thanks for that question, Representative Wild. I'll start and try to be brief. In addition to the measures that I mentioned regarding the project pitch and the administrative compliance aspects in my opening statement, again, we have tried to change our process and our proposal format to really align more with the natural language of entrepreneurs, right? Our goal is to make SBIR not a separate offshoot of the startup and entrepreneurial process, but to have it be aligned with it so that the things you're going to be doing to prepare a proposal to NSF SBIR are the same things you need to be doing anyway to build your business and your business model and your understanding of your customers. So really trying to have the commercialization focus in our format and in our review criteria. And then again, the commercialization experience of our program directors. The other thing I would say is that we do bring in, as was mentioned before, a number of commercial reviewers at both Phase 1 and Phase 2. And those are typically entrepreneurs and investors where, again, there's an empathy between the folks who are reviewing the proposal, providing feedback, and the folks who are applying. And I think that creates more comfort in the process and makes folks more willing to go through what is a lengthy review timeline.
Thank you. Let's switch over there then to Dr. Binkley, if we could, on that question.
Okay, thank you, Representative Wild. That's really a great question also. And in addition to reviewing our overall proposal process and trying to simplify it, we have introduced, I think, some streamlining there. But then more importantly, we've created an application assistance program that targets first-time SBIR, STTR applicants. We actually did that in 2014, and we've been using it since then. And the focus of this application assistance program is not solely on steering small businesses through the application process in a timely fashion, but similar to what my NSF colleague mentioned, it also provides critical reviews to proposers to ensure that a high quality application can be developed and submitted.
Thank you so much. I just think it's very important that we always keep in mind that small businesses have tight operation margins and investing the time to write a competitive application is a large investment, and we want to do everything that we can to make sure that we are assisting these small businesses. With that, Madam Chairwoman, I yield back. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Look, we're going to do a very brief round of second questions with yours truly, in part because of where we were on data questioning. So that's the question I just want to get in for the record here. We've seen that critical tools in grant making oversight is the ability to measure the impact of the funding towards an intended goal. And in the past, data challenges have limited the ability for agencies to track commercialization benchmarks, but agencies were also able to identify the barriers and address those issues. You know, I've been an NSF applicant in a previous life. I know people who've gotten SBIRs. We heard from Dr. Feldman very extensively and to great appreciation on some of this data and surveying benchmarking. But I wanted to get our private sector voices in here. And I was just wondering, Mr. Karavias, if we could just start with you about how you have participated in surveys as an NSF applicant. And by the way, congratulations on getting to phase 3 here. That's a really, I've looked at those phases, and that's really just tremendous to see your technology through that process. But any inputs you could make on surveying for us here?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. We have participated. We have not participated in surveys at all. We have participated. I guess we have won, or I have won in a prior company an NSF proposal, and we were very appreciative of that, a phase 1, which did not go to a phase 2. I'm not sure how else. Is there something specifically that I could answer about surveys, you know, not having done any myself, or possibly something about how small companies?
Yeah, I just think in terms of when you're being surveyed, I know you've obviously been funded SBIR through the DoD, but do you feel like you're getting the right questions asked, you know, that are contributing to these overall data benchmarks that Dr. Feldman mentioned?
Not having participated in the surveys, I think it's very difficult for me to comment on that, Madam Chair. Okay,
well, has Dr. Rule done a survey? Like, who else here's been part of the surveys from the?
Yeah,
I mean, obviously Schrag's sending them out, but you know, who's been doing them?
So I can chime in. Yeah. So I think surveys are often neglected. So the NSF has a much more clever tactic. So before you can get the last amount of money from your grant, you have to provide considerable feedback in a project report. And they do that on purpose. So that way they can get some of these metrics in place to figure out where you are on your journey and where the funds were spent.
Chairwoman, if you mind if I chime in here?
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah, we
Okay.
need to hear from the agencies too.
Okay, no, I think this is a great, important question, and we have actually spent a lot of time trying to figure out how best to assess outcomes. There's a lot of challenges in this, as Maryann had referred to. You know, one of the main things is that when our companies become successful, it can be a decade or more, right? We had a company called Ginkgo Bioworks that was a company that went public last year for $16 billion. NSF funded them in 2007. And so the ability to kind of survey a company that you funded that long ago is difficult. You've lost contact with them in many cases, and you have to find them. And so the approach that we have taken more recently, you know, we have in the past used surveys, but more recently, the approach that we've taken to tracking our companies, and again, this is focused on private sector commercialization as the outcome, so it may differ, but we use third-party tools as a primary way to do that. There are services out there like PitchBook and CB Insights that track the financial status and health of private companies. And so we can actually make a list of all the companies we funded and put them in these systems, and they automatically give us updates on the transactions those companies are going through, if they're acquired, if they're raising money. We get that information for free in real time without having to go and survey the company. In addition, I do think surveys have potentially a place. We don't typically do them right now, but I think The small percentage of the companies that are the big success stories, which can be identified using these third-party tools, you can then go and do a deeper dive into, into what makes them tick or how they've done with surveys. But obviously, since we've funded 3,000 different small businesses over the last decade, doing surveys to all of them is a little bit difficult for us to manage.
Right. Okay. Because, well, Dr. Feldman, in her testimony, said waste, fraud, and abuse. And I'm just trying to get at what she's talking about here. Is there a concern for this? Because it seems to me, I mean, even with Caravias, I mean, he's going through the DOD, and I have worked with DOD funding before. We've seen it. It's very strict. So is there a concern for this, or is there something we're missing on the surveys here? Or
May I say that I was really talking about proposals to limit the number of awards that a company can apply for or can receive. And so we've heard that this is a concern, and I think it would be a bad idea in that we see, because it's difficult to write proposals, there are economies of scale of having firms with a lot of PIs who are writing projects. And so I think that we should not limit the amount, and that's why I mentioned it.
okay.
Because I think if we want to encourage innovation, we just want to let there be as much experimentation and as many applications as possible.
Yeah, because if you're limited, what happens? You know, what do you start a new company, or you
That's
know?
the fear, right?
Yeah, you know, or you're stopped in your tracks. I mean, I just a couple weeks ago, we spent some time reviewing all these phases and the ways in which you get an SBIR, and it's not easy, and yet it really is serving a very unique purpose. Okay, so I'm over the 5 minutes for the second round of questions. We don't have any other member who wants to do a second round of questions, so we're going to move to close. And obviously a huge thank you to our witnesses. Thanks for your patience at the beginning of this hearing as we moved from hybrid to all in Zoom. We did have the Zoom hybrid working yesterday, and I'll tell you the science committee here under my chairmanship last term was one of the first subcommittees to continue with committee activity in March and April of 2020, because we know, although pandemics are long, oftentimes, the work of innovation does not stop. The work of entrepreneurs and makers and dreamers and doers. And, you know, we're really excited to have had today's kind of fact-based hearing on SBIR, STTR programs, your expertise and your knowledge. This was very, very insightful. And I know that the colleagues who participated and who will participate following the conclusion of the hearing in the 2-week question for the record period have really appreciated your time and obviously the trajectory as we move forward with the reauthorization legislation that Dr. Baird and I introduced. So with that, again, the record is going to remain open for 2 weeks, and the witnesses will be excused, and the hearing is now adjourned.